Somewhere in Vietnam in 1978, a family of 19 people is boarding a freight ship they will share with 2,300 strangers. There is no toilet. The cargo hold smells of rotting flour. Children are sleeping upright, backs propped against strangers' backs. This family paid for those tickets. Not with dollars, not with Vietnamese dong. The communists had already made sure that was worthless. They paid with 154 gold bars, 1.2 ounces each, pure 24-karat gold, hammered out on the black market. In today's money, that's over $135,000. Now ask yourself, what did they use that gold for? Not barter, not trading it for rice or soap. They used it to buy their lives, to cross a border, to escape. And yet, every gold commercial, every survival forum, every doomsday prepper guide gets this completely wrong. They'll tell you gold is for trading with your neighbors when the grid goes down. Buy some gold coins, they say. You'll be able to barter for food. History says something very different. Today we're going through every major economic collapse of the last 150 years. Weimar Germany, post-war Vietnam, Argentina 2001, Zimbabwe, the Great Depression, and tracking what people actually used gold for when everything fell apart. The answer is going to surprise you, and once you understand it, you'll never think about gold the same way again. The barter myth, why everyone gets this wrong. Let's start with the myth, because it's everywhere. The popular picture of gold in a collapse goes something like this. The currency fails, the stores run out of food, and suddenly everyone is doing deals across the fence. You've got gold, your neighbor has chickens, you swap. Gold as the universal barter token. This picture isn't entirely wrong. In extreme situations, gold does circulate, but it's not the primary use, not historically, and not in the collapses where gold actually mattered. Here's the problem with barter gold logic. If society has collapsed far enough that your currency is worthless, then you've got a bigger problem than what to use as a medium of exchange. You've got a problem of how to survive in or escape from a failed state. And gold, in every historical case we can study, turns out to be a tool for that, not a replacement currency. Economists who've looked at actual doomsday and collapse scenarios point out something uncomfortable. In a real societal collapse, practical goods dominate. Food, water, fuel, antibiotics. People don't trade gold for a can of beans. They trade the thing they have too much of for the thing they need. Gold's real power shows up earlier, in the phase before total collapse, and in the critical window during collapse, when some systems still function and borders are still crossable. That's the window. And gold's purpose in that window has nothing to do with barter. Weimar Germany, 1921 to 1923. The Great Transfer. To understand what gold actually does during collapse, start with the most studied hyperinflation in history. By November 1923, the German mark had reached 4 trillion to $1. You could wallpaper a room with what it cost to buy a single loaf of bread. A student ordered a cup of coffee, and by the time he finished it, the price had gone up. Now here's what people with gold actually did. They bought. Not chickens, not soap, assets. At the peak of the Weimar hyperinflation, a city block of commercial real estate in downtown Berlin could be purchased for 25 ounces of gold, at the time worth approximately $500. The people who had held gold didn't just survive. They emerged from the collapse as major property owners, having purchased assets from desperate sellers at fractions of their real value. This is the first real purpose of gold in a collapse. Not barter. Acquisition. The transfer of wealth from people who held paper to people who held metal. There's a famous account from the Weimar period. A single ounce of gold, or 2 depending on the source, was enough to buy a grand house. One that a middle-class family had built over decades of savings. Destroyed by inflation in months. Acquired by someone with a few coins in their pocket. Interestingly, real estate wasn't a great inflation hedge for the sellers in Weimar. Rents were legally capped and couldn't keep up with hyperinflation, so landlords found themselves with property that cost more to maintain than it earned. They sold. And the people who could buy or the people with gold? Gold's purpose in Weimar Germany. Preservation of purchasing power so it could be deployed at the bottom, to buy real assets while everyone else was desperate. Vietnam, 1975 to 1979. Gold as an exit visa. The fall of Saigon in April 1975 is one of the cleanest natural experiments in what gold is actually for. The new communist regime confiscated businesses, nationalized commerce, and stripped the ethnic Chinese merchant class, the Hua, of their livelihoods. Overnight, the assets of a lifetime became worthless paper under a government that had declared them illegitimate. Between 1975 and 1995, over 3 million people fled Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. They became known as the Boat People. And here's what gold did. Passage on the smuggling ships was purchased not in dong, but in luong, 1.2-ounce gold bars. One family's documented account. 154 gold bars, worth over $135,000 in today's money, to get 19 family members onto a freight ship. Everyone else paid the captain in gold. One refugee's account from the 1970s is blunt. The captain allowed his family to travel for free because his brother was the engineer. Everyone else paid in gold. The pirates who attacked these boats knew this too. They weren't looking for rice. The harrowing accounts from survivors describe being raided specifically for gold and money. That's what these desperate people were carrying, because that was the only thing that worked. Gold's purpose in Vietnam. A portable, universally accepted store of value that could cross borders when everything else, bank accounts, real estate, business ownership, could not. This is the second real purpose. Mobility. The ability to carry your wealth with you when everything else is seized, frozen, or declared worthless by a new regime. World War II Jewish refugees. Gold as a bribe. The Holocaust is the darkest case study in this analysis, but it illustrates something specific that no other episode shows as clearly. Gold as the difference between life and death, not through trade or barter, but through negotiation with power. Between 1933 and 1939, more than 90,000 German and Austrian Jews fled to neighboring countries as Nazi persecution escalated. Many of those who escaped did so by converting their assets, bank accounts, real estate, businesses, into portable, concealable wealth before leaving. In Slovakia, a secret Jewish rescue organization called the Working Group used gold to bribe SS officers. They paid SS Captain Dieter Wisliczeny, Adolf Eichmann's deputy, to halt deportations from Slovakia in 1942. The bribes may have worked, at least partially. This was not barter. This was ransom. Negotiation with a murderous bureaucracy that still, at that moment, had a price. Even the Swiss banks understood this logic, though not in a way that reflects well on them. The Swiss Central Bank knowingly converted Nazi-looted gold stolen from occupied countries and from Jewish victims, into Swiss francs, which then funded Germany's war effort. Gold moved across borders, greased deals, and financed systems even when every other financial instrument had been destroyed by war. Gold's purpose in wartime Europe: negotiation with power. Whether that meant bribing a border guard, paying a smuggler, or financing resistance networks, gold was the only currency that both sides of a collapsing civilization would accept. Argentina, 2001. Gold as the bridge to the other side. Argentina's 2001 crisis is one of the most instructive modern collapses because it's recent, documented, and happened in a relatively sophisticated economy. In December 2001, Argentina defaulted on $144 billion in debt, the largest sovereign default in history at that point. The government froze bank accounts in a measure called the Corralito. Unemployment hit 20%. Inflation spiked. 5 presidents in 2 weeks. People with money in Argentine pesos watched it devalue by nearly 75% against the dollar after the peso-dollar peg broke. A middle-class family with 100,000 pesos in January 2002 had roughly $25,000 in purchasing power by April. The people who held gold didn't barter. They converted. They waited out the storm with their purchasing power intact. And then, when the recovery began in 2003 and 2004, they converted back into real assets at distressed prices. Real estate. Businesses. Stocks at the bottom. The critical insight? Argentina's crisis was bad, but recoverable. The bank freeze lasted months, not forever. The key was surviving the window with purchasing power intact. Gold did that. Not as a trading currency, as a bridge. By 1989 and 1990, Argentina had already been through dozens of inflationary cycles. By that point, ordinary Argentines had learned a crucial behavioral lesson. When the peso weakened, convert to hard assets. Gold was one of them. The US dollar was another, which is why, after years of hyperinflation, Argentines had already started demanding payment in dollars instead of pesos. Gold and dollars became de facto parallel currencies long before the official system broke. Gold's purpose in Argentina: a store of purchasing power through the chaos window, deployable on the other side when everything else was repriced at the bottom. Gold's 4 real purposes, ranked by how often they actually appear in history. Across every major collapse we've just examined, and dozens more in the historical record, gold serves 4 distinct purposes, ranked from most common to least. Number 1. Purchasing power preservation. This is the primary function. Gold doesn't go up in value during inflation and collapse. The currency collapses around it. Gold is the fixed point. In Weimar Germany, gold went from 170 marks per ounce to 87 trillion marks per ounce. Not because gold got more valuable, but because the mark became worthless. Anyone who held gold held their purchasing power. Anyone who held marks lost everything. This applies in almost every collapse. Weimar, Argentina, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Hungary post-World War II. Gold held its purchasing power relative to goods. Everything else didn't. But notice, this still isn't barter. This is preservation. You're not buying bread with gold. You're surviving the collapse intact so you can participate in the recovery. Number 2. Capital flight and escape. The second most common use? Get out. When a regime changes, when a government seizes assets, when capital controls go up, gold is the thing you can physically carry across a border. Bank accounts can be frozen. Real estate can be seized. Gold bars sewn into a jacket lining. Gold jewelry worn openly. These travel. The Vietnamese boat people case is the clearest example, but it appears throughout history. Jewish refugees in the 1930s, Cuban exiles in 1959, and again in 1980. Iranians after the Islamic Revolution in 1979. In every case, those who converted assets to portable, globally recognized value before the exit closed survived with something. Those who didn't. This is why gold has always been described as stateless money. It has no issuer. No government can declare it worthless by decree. It's accepted in Zurich, Hong Kong, Singapore, and New York, regardless of what's happening in Hanoi.